Luyt here from Michalsons Attorneys. I'd like to chat to you today about data processing agreements. So a data processing agreement or data processing addendum is a legally binding document that describes an arrangement between two organizations where one instructs the other to perform information operations on their behalf. So for example, where a controller instructs a processor. So just to name a few more commonplace examples, in the context of payroll, an employer might instruct a human resources company to pay their employees on their behalf each month. In the context of telecoms, an organization might instruct a telecom service provider to route calls, messages, or data traffic through their network. And in the context of pension funds, a pension fund might instruct an administration company to administer members' benefits and payments on their behalf. So this almost always entails a third party processing people's personal data. So for this reason, data protection laws generally have strict rules governing data processing agreements. So these agreements are either between a controller and a processor, that's the most common form, or between a processor and a sub-processor. That's a less common form, sometimes referred to as a sub-processing agreement. So if you're unsure whether you need a data processing agreement or not, you probably do, and there could be dire consequences for not having one. So let's discuss why a data processing agreement is important. So they're important because data protection laws generally require an agreement whenever a controller instructs a processor or whenever a processor instructs a sub-processor. And on that point, maybe it's useful just to show you this diagram here of the processing chain. So whenever a controller instructs a processor or whenever a controller instructs a sub-processor. And they instruct them to carry out data processing tasks on their behalf involving personal data. So there are severe consequences for instructing a controller or processor if they fail to have a data processing agreement in place. We've actually written an article all about how data processing agreements are required by law. And if you have a look at the accompanying article on our website, you'll see a link to that. So it's also important for an organization to understand data processing agreements, whether they're a controller processor or a sub-processor, regardless of whether they're the instructing organization or not, because data processing agreements affect your organization no matter where it sits in the processing chain. So for example, if you are a sub-processor, the agreement between the controller and the processor will get fed to you by a sub-processor agreement over here, so it's still going to affect you no matter where you are in the chain. So how do you benefit from having a data processing agreement? Well, it's a legal requirement. Data protection law generally requires a data controller to have a DPA in place whenever they use a processor, and the same for a processor whenever they use a sub-processor. You could avoid regulatory fines because you receive fines from regulatory authorities if you don't have one where you should. It protects all the parties involved by making sure that each organization in the processing chain operates in compliance with relevant data protection laws and holds up their end of the bargain to protect the interests of all parties. It helps you meet certain minimal requirements, because data protection laws generally prescribe minimal requirements for inclusion in DPAs, which protect data subjects through a system of checks and balances between the controller and the processor, or the processor and the sub-processor. It helps you with other people's data processing agreements because others may present you with DPAs that could be adequate, but you need to make sure that they protect your organization and not simply for the other party's benefit. It can help you with information security. You may not be doing enough to secure the personal data that you process or others process on your behalf without the necessary undertakings to stick to certain information security requirements. And you may struggle to respond to data breaches, leaks, or other incidents quickly, comprehensively, and effectively without the necessary paperwork to get help from your processors or sub-processors. So if DPAs are a problem for you, and I'm sure they are, then the next step is for you to draw up a DPA of sorts. The controller often draws up the DPA to make sure that the processor handles the controller's data properly, but this need not always be the case, and there are benefits to a processor or even a sub-processor drawing up their own DPA themselves. So if you can't decide whether you're a controller or a processor, have a look at the relevant article associated with this video, and you'll see that we've got a tool on our website to work out who's responsible for data protection in your relationships. But whether you're a controller, processor, or a sub-processor, things you could do are consider joining our data processing relationship program, which is a specialist satellite program focusing on DPAs and data processing relationships. Join our main data protection program, which includes the satellite program and various other satellite programs. complete our online data processing relationship assessment to give us some insight into how you're currently managing your data processing relationships, and we'll contact you with next steps. Or complete the form on the right, or use the Inquire Now button on the relevant article, and we'll contact you to find more about your requirements and give you a quote. So thanks very much for your attention, and we look forward to helping you with data processing agreements very soon.